I'm William Sieghart and I'm the Poetry Pharmacist. This is the Hospital Room's Digital Art School. And today we're in my home and we're going to read and write some poetry. I discovered poetry, like a lot of people do, at a very difficult time in my life when I was a little boy and I was sent to boarding school at the age of 8 to a place where really no one loved me. And poetry became my friend. I was lucky enough to win a little prize for reading poetry aloud. And from then on, I suppose in hindsight, I was self-medicating with poetry all my life. And years later, I started listening to people's problems and finding poetry to help people. And out of that came the Poetry Pharmacy. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. I first did it at a little literary festival down in Cornwall when I sat in a tent and offered to listen to people telling me their problems. And I thought I'd do it for an hour or two. And 5 hours later, when I popped out of the tent for a comfort break, I found that the blackboard outside, where people had been booking appointments, had been booked for the entire weekend. That was nearly 15 years ago, and ever since, the Poetry Pharmacy has taken over my life. It's been a really extraordinarily humbling process and an extraordinary privileged process, because I've learnt that whoever we are, from whatever background we are, from whatever part of the country we are, we all have the same problems. And bit by bit I've discovered that if you can find the right poem for the right time, for the right problem that you have, it can be really remarkably effective in making you feel better. And poetry, as they say, doesn't really have any contraindications. It's just there to help. Today I'd like to focus on 3 poems that are going to appear in your lovely box. They're posters that we've made of the poems, and those 3 poems I'm going to talk about, and one of them in particular I'm going to work with you to see if you can learn it off by heart, to write it out, and to perhaps stick it on your mirror in life. The first poem is a poem that actually most of you will know already, because they're the words of a song. They were originally written for a musical called Carousel by Oscar Hammerstein. And he wrote it in the 1940s, and it became a big musical on Broadway, and probably came to Britain, though I don't know whether actually it was on stage long before my time. But it was adopted, these words, as a song in Anfield Stadium. And you'll know that well, I'm sure, because some of you may well be Liverpool supporters, the champions. And I use this as my antidote for despair, I suppose. It's when I'm short of hope and I need a little bit of encouragement in life. And here is this extraordinary poem. The words of this particular poem inspire me to search for hope and to cling to it, so that I have solace in the loneliness and despair of the storm. As long as we have dreams of better times to keep us company, we are never alone. I advise learning it off by heart if you can. Maybe you know it already, and keeping it ready for when life becomes difficult for you. There's nothing like an inspiring anthem to get you through the wind and the rain. And remember, whatever else, the one thing that no one can ever take away from you is hope. This is from You'll Never Walk Alone by Oscar Hammerstein. Walk on through the wind. Walk on through the rain. Though your dreams be tossed and blown, walk on with hope in your heart. And you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. One of the reasons why I think poetry can be so comforting and so helpful in this increasingly difficult digital world is that if we find the right poem for our feelings, usually expressed rather more elegantly than we can express ourselves, then we realise we're not alone. It gives us a complicity with how we feel. And of course, if it was written long ago, it makes us realise that people have always felt like this. And we're no longer sad, we're no longer mad, we're no longer lonely. It makes sense, it gives us a resonance and a real reassurance for our feelings. It normalises them. And I think that is just a brilliant example. And it's interesting about poetry, people are often afraid of the word poetry. They think it's something perhaps that they don't get or that they can't get. And probably if I stood outside Anfield and said, I love that poem you were singing, they'd look at me, those Liverpool supporters, and think I was bonkers. But it's a beautiful piece of poetry. And as so often in our lives when we're young, and I'm sure you've all done this, you know the words to songs. You probably sung them in the mirror and to yourself when you were a teenager. Those were the songs that gave us hope and gave us support, perhaps when we were going through our most difficult and our most troubled times. So, that is Oscar Hammerstein. Now, there's also a wonderful poet called Wendy Cope. And Wendy Cope is probably one of the most popular poets in Britain today. And she writes, I think, some of the funniest and easiest and most reassuring of poems. And the second poster that's in your wonderful box is called The Orange by Wendy Cope. And I think what I like to say about this is that it's probably what I use for general overload in life. When you're a bit depressed, when sometimes you're despairing or straining under the complications of life, the orange just seems to make life so simple. Sometimes life, after all, can be so extraordinarily complicated, so full of tumult and drama, that it feels as if we'll never be calm again. And then, every now and then, we come upon a moment of peace. The clouds part, the wind dies down, and suddenly we can breathe again. And we discover that the noise and bother were in our heads all along. The world turns out to be quite a simple place, really, when we approach it in the right frame of mind. Here's The Orange by Wendy Cope. At lunchtime I bought a huge orange. The size of it made us all laugh. I peeled it and shared it with Robert and Dave. They got quarters and I had a half. And that orange, it made me so happy, as ordinary things often do just lately. The shopping, a walk in the park, this is peace and contentment. It's new. The rest of the day was quite easy. I did all the jobs on my list and enjoyed them and had some time over. I love you. I'm glad I exist. Just makes me feel calm and happy, that poem, doesn't it? So, as people came and told me their problems, and I listened, and I visited libraries all over the country, and listened to over 1,000 people's problems one-on-one, the most common problem that I had to deal with is loneliness. And it's interesting because we live in such a world now where I'm afraid this, I think, is probably the reason. It's bizarre because in some ways there's more ways to communicate with people than ever before, more forms of social media or platforms to connect with other people. But in some ways I began to discover as I listened to people that actually this becomes a pressure, not a resource. That actually often we communicate in social media as though we're an avatar of ourselves. We don't tell people what we really feel. We're constantly trying to make people think that our lives are happier, more friendly, more exciting than they really are. And nobody seems to say on social media, I'm lonely, I need a friend, I need a hug. And as I listened to people talk about their loneliness more and more, I began to find the most powerful prescription that I use in my pharmacy. It's really 4 lines of poetry, that's all. And it was written by a Persian poet 700 years ago, a man called Hafez from a place called Shiraz. And he said, and we're going to write it out together and learn it off by heart together. But he said, I wish I could show you when you're lonely or in darkness the astonishing light of your own being. Even just saying it now, and I've said it hundreds of times, it brings goosebumps to me. And it assures and reassures me of the extraordinarily prayerful power of words and of poetry to deal with my daily difficulties. I'd say to people when I gave them those lines of poetry, and often they seem to get out of the chair a foot taller afterwards, that they should learn those lines off by heart. They should write them down. They should stick them on their mirror. They should say them to themselves every single day, particularly if they live on their own and they have no one around to say it to them. We need in our world the reassurance of other voices, of a complicity to our complicated feelings. And that's what I believe Hafez can do for us. So if you have a pencil and paper, or a paintbrush, or a pen and ink, let's get it out and let's play with Hafez, and let's create something that you can put on your mirror, or even after you've watched and listened to this, you can decorate and even draw a picture of what to you'd like to go with those inspiring words. I made a children's book many years ago, illustrated by the wonderful Emily Sutton, and her illustration to those words was just a massive beaming sun with a little face and eyes on it, just bringing sunlight and radiance into children's lives. And maybe that's what you'd like, but I'll leave it up to you for how you'd like to illustrate these words. Treat that as your little inspiration for the day, and maybe it could become a daily practice for you. If you suffer from loneliness or depression, it could be the kind of daily thing that you could do. You could write down these words, and then you could decide how today you'd like to illustrate it. So, one of the joys of poetry is that it's not too much of a challenge. All you need is a pencil and paper, or perhaps in the modern world, a keyboard to tap away at. But you don't need many resources. And let's go with Hafez. I wish I could show you when you are lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being. I wish I could show you when you are lonely or in darkness the astonishing light of your own being. Isn't that wonderful? May this become your daily practice, your mantra, your companion, your friend. Because I believe that that's what poetry can become, particularly if you learn it off by heart. And this won't take you long to learn. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening. And thank you for taking part. I hope that poetry will be part of your life again from now on.